Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marcia Leonard. All right, everybody, today's episode might be a bit of a controversial episode because we're going to be discussing coal and the role that it actually has to play in this energy transition space. And the reason that it might be a little bit controversial is because coal is the largest CO2 emitter in the energy sector. Yet, let's be real, we still have a demand for energy and it's only increasing and it's only growing. And until we can find and implement new and advanced technologies like nuclear, it still has a role to play. So I'm joined today by somebody who has a similar background to myself in the fact that we come from a couple of generations in the energy sector, but very different from my oil and gas background. He comes from renewables and solar, to be exact, and someone who I think might have been a little bit happy to see coal in his stocking over the holiday season. Ryan Pickering, welcome to Elemental Energy.
Thank you for having me, Marcia. I'm learning so much as we piece this whole energy puzzle together, and I'm excited to talk about one of the original energy sources and one of the energy sources I learned about last in my energy professional career. So it's funny that, so many previous generations started with coal for electricity design and energy designs in general. And here I am 14 years into my career, just learning about coal for the first time. And I'm looking forward to discussing it together.
Okay, so you just started to cover a bit about your history. Let's take it further, introduce yourself further, give everybody your background and who you are.
Sure. My name is Ryan Pickering. I'm from Berkeley, California. I followed my parents' careers around my whole life, moved a lot, was born in New York, lived in New Jersey, Colorado, California, Southern California, and now I'm living in Berkeley, and I bill myself as an energy policy researcher because that's what I like to spend my time doing. I have many allegiances right now. No one's paying me anything, but I certainly volunteer quite a bit with different groups focused on energy justice, energy literacy, energy transition, a word that's kind of falling out of favor, perhaps. And I'm here talking to you in Berkeley at a hotel room. And if I could just tell you this story, because I'm on a wild adventure over the last 24 hours, Marcia.
Yes, please
Okay,
tell the story.
great. So I spent the first 13 years of my professional career working in rooftop solar in California, an incredible market. We really thought we were making an impact. It's a purpose-driven industry. And my friend who's been in solar energy, he started with pool solar in the early 2000s and then moved into photovoltaic solar. So he's been building solar for 20 years and he's well renowned, especially in Northern California. And I can't say too many details, but we were celebrating last night because he's decided to acquire one of the largest solar installers in the Bay Area. And, I know that company very well and worked with them in my career. And the ink is he's actually driving to meet the owner of that company right now to sign the deal. I can't disclose how much. It's not an enormous number. Solar installers, we were never that valuable. We're just, two chucks in a truck, as we used to call it. But, this outfit has 17 solar installation firms. They have over 1,000 microgrids in the Bay Area. And as things push forward, the solar industry, so long as there's policy and folks wanting to go off grid and that aesthetic, I think it'll continue to be popular. So last night we tied one off here at the restaurant at the hotel. And then he said, Ryan, I need to go home tonight, but you're going to take my hotel key and you're going to stay here. And I'm staying in the tower suite, and we just celebrated. And even though I live just right down the street, I got to stay in this beautiful hotel. And now I'm talking to you, and I'm feeling so grateful for the solar industry. But we talked more than just solar last night. We went deep about what it's going to take to really power the grid of tomorrow. If we're going to 3 to 5 times the size of our electricity grid, how are we going to keep up with all of this demand? How are we going to reconcile with the utility companies? How are we going to build high quality assets? And, how can we continue to build some of these, have a diverse energy portfolio? And we don't have any coal in California. We shut it all down. California, if you look at electricity maps, you'll see that it's on a sunny day, it's solar powered. And on every other day, it's natural gas powered. And about 48 to 55% of our grid comes from natural gas. So I'm grateful for it. We also have the most expensive electricity in the continental United States. And heck, electricity was a lot cheaper when we did have coal in the state, but we did have some air quality challenges. But there's lots of coal left in the United States. It powers about 20% of our grid. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens to that coal as solar continues to come online, other renewables, natural gas continues to power most of things and continues to drive down consumer prices. I'm grateful for. And maybe even the dark horse nuclear fission powering 20% of the American grid today. Maybe nuclear fission can be expanded as well to rise to this challenge and take pressure off of a resource like coal.
I told you this is going to be controversial. You're talking about coal from Berkeley, controversy number one.
Yeah. And I don't really know anything about it, but I do like coal for some of its characteristics. And those characteristics that I like are it can run a big steam turbine train generator, really big ones, anywhere from 30 megawatts to 1200 megawatts. And that provides an enormous amount of energy. That's what founded the electricity in the United States and around the world. Electricity has been coal powered, and it's proven to be very reliable. Another thing I like about coal is you can store the fuel on site. That's not something that natural gas does as well. It's more just in time. There's some natural gas storage I'm aware of, but it's kind of like a battery when you have a giant stack of coal outside of a coal plant and you can burn it on demand. And that's about it. Those are the only two things I really like about coal. Spins a big turbine and it has fuel security. And they're easy to weatherize, I suppose. They can run at a high capacity factor. But I think those are two very important characteristics. And if we're going to tackle the cost of living crisis, the environmental crisis, we need reliable, affordable, sustainable energy. And I think that's really what I'm all about. This is a long-winded introduction to say my name is Ryan Pickering, and I'm dedicated to solving the energy trilemma of affordability, reliability, and sustainability. And it's incumbent on the United States to figure this out and share it with our allies.
Yeah, the energy trifecta, that's the mission for most people in this transition space is to find reliable, affordable, and then I'm even throwing clean in on it because I once heard this quote, if coal is only considered cheap because coal plants do not have to pay for the full social environmental cost of coal burning on people's health and the environment and our climate. And
Mm,
that's why it's considered cheap. But if it took into account all of the health problems and the issues caused from the emissions, I mean, it would not be considered cheap. And that's why it's been such a push for countries to phase it out, even like the United States promising by 2030, along with 20 other countries, to phase out coal power generation. But let's be real. How are we going to make up that power generation necessary until nuclear has really established grounds? And that's another thing I wanted to talk to you about is you had an interesting comment the other day when you and I spoke about how, you know, we are looking at small modular reactors and advanced nuclear reactors, and we're kind of overlooking the current nuclear technology and traditional technology that's already in place. Expand on that further.
Hmm. I'm frustrated with nuclear, I gotta say. I The landscape is not positive, and the United States needs to get far more serious if there's going to be any growth in nuclear in the United States. And when I look at what natural gas prices have been able to achieve, come on. If we don't get prices down to $22 a megawatt hour, then we're just going to keep burning gas. And we have so much gas in this country that it'll be fine and we'll export it. And, you know, it'll be expensive and we'll back it up with wind and solar because wind and solar have this mandate to build. And it's challenging to build wind and solar, don't get me wrong, all these transmission lines and everything, but at least the public supports it. At least politicians can build it into their platform and seek some kind of return. With nuclear, it has no natural constituency, excuse me. The people who advocate for nuclear are this disparate bunch that have many different values. And, it's going to take a lot for me to feel better about nuclear, but that's why I work on nuclear most of the time because I see that as, you know, it's this missing piece if we're going to achieve this energy abundance that we're talking about and keep up with this demand because, natural gas, it's great when you have access to the wells that it's coming out of and a pressurized pipeline to get it to a plant. There's a lot of places in the United States that can't work. And that's where coal is really footing the bill. You can transport coal. You got to put it on rail or trucks. But, some of the we've reduced our coal burn in the United States by almost 75% in the last 20 years. Since 2002 to 2022, yeah, we've reduced our terawatt hours of coal by about 75% and largely replaced that with natural gas. And this fracking revolution is just incredible. We talk about fracking, but and all of these advanced recovery models, and it all only started what in 2008. When did 2007? When did the price of natural gas really start to decline and everything kind of switch that way?
Oh gosh, I would be remiss if I said that it was around 2012 is what I want to think, because I don't want to date myself. Okay. I need to look into that a bit because I still have, coming from oil and gas, I have a strange feeling with fracking just because of how you really can't control those fixtures. And you really can't control what water sources. Back to our initial even talking about aquifers and resources and water resources. And I know that we've cleaned up our practices a lot in regards to drilling, but I feel that there's something better. I do feel that there's something better than fracking to that could be harming our planet. And I don't know how in depth it goes. There are people who study this, geologists who go even further, but still in my heart, I feel that there is something a lot easier on our Earth to obtain energy output. So I'm still kind of on the fence about that. So tell me, because you just talked about you're mad at nuclear, you do support natural gas, you like coal, but like where do your allegiances really lie? Like what do you think the power of the future looks like if we get everything right?
Well, I like to look at 100-year horizon, and I think in 100 years we're going to be primarily nuclear fission. And the question is, how smooth, how affordable, how cool can we make that? Is it going to be this very start and stop thing? I don't know. I do know that mm, expensive nuclear is not good enough. Expensive nuclear will only have a small fraction of the market, or maybe not at all. And so what we're doing right now in the United States, it's excellent technology, but it's too expensive and it won't compete. So I think we're going to need to see entrepreneurs from around the world go to countries who haven't signed 1, 2, 3 agreements, who are just getting into nuclear for the first time, and build much simpler reactors with a different regulatory environment that has different risk tolerances and prove out a very simple reactor design that's can make power, that we can install for something like $1 a watt. And, Chinese nuclear today is $2 to $3 a watt. American nuclear is $6 to $15 a watt. Korean nuclear is $5 a watt. We need the developing world needs it to be $1 a watt if it's going to compete. And I, I'd like to see the United States get serious about it. But if we don't, we'll just get our butts kicked by China and Russia and these developing countries who have a different risk tolerance and the way they innovate on their regulations. As you know, there's quite a few regulations in American nuclear and in nuclear in general, and that those have been very positive in some senses, but it's a complex nut to crack. I think the regulations are part of it. I think the cowardice of the business community is part of it. I think the cowardice of our politicians and the silence of our scientists and academics on nuclear. We've allowed ourselves to just become very afraid of something that's not dangerous, and that seems like a real missed opportunity.
Yeah, it is a real shame, the negative public perception of nuclear right now. I mean, I combat that often. As soon as I tell any of my friends that I'm in nuclear and business development for nuclear, they're like, what? What? We're still doing that? What about Three Mile Island, Fukushima? Like these things are still brought up on a regular occurrence for even intelligent people in the energy sector, other parts of the energy sector, but there's still that kind of distaste for nuclear, which is so sad.
Hmm.
Okay, so you just came back from COP 28 and you got to actually tour one of the nuclear plants there, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
incredible. Incredible.
What size was it?
5 gigawatts.
How long did it take them to build that plant? Do you know?
So the plant is called Baraka, which means divine blessing in Arabic. And it was initiated 12 years ago in partnership between the United Arab Emirates and some Korean entities and a global effort. The Emirates paid top dollar and famously imported talent from around the world. I met many old school American nuclear heads working on the construction team, and UK people from the UK, all kinds of global nuclear talent. And it was an obvious choice because Baraka was one of the only plants under construction outside of China or Russia. And it was Korea's only plant that are exporting. The US is barely exporting anything. And they built it for about $5 a watt, $25 billion. It's 4 reactors. It's a 14 each reactor's 1400 watts, 1400 megawatts, excuse me. And it's a beautiful design. It's based off an American design that the Koreans acquired. So it's very similar to Palo Verde in Arizona, outside of Phoenix. They use once through cooling from the ocean, and it's a beautiful plant. You can hop on my LinkedIn and see some behind the scenes filming that I did. We took a bus from Dubai. It was a 4 hour bus ride. We just took a day off from COP, all piled on the bus, went down there, got to go inside the control room simulator, see it's an exact replica of the control room in the plant. And just, see it all and all the data is live. So you're seeing the plant in action, but none of the buttons. Well, the buttons work, but it's on a software system. It's not controlling the reactor. So, and I was there with 50 other nuclear advocates that we were all hosted with much gusto by the Emirates Nuclear Energy Corporation. and they wanted us to be there at COP to talk to the public about nuclear. It's interesting, even a lot of Emiratis don't feel that nuclear energy is clean energy. A lot of Emiratis are scared of nuclear. And so ENEC, as it's called, Emirates Nuclear Energy Corporation, had the wisdom to fly a bunch of pros out, mostly young people too. Almost, I was the old one in the group, and we had 17-year-old Will Shackle from Australia who's leading the charge to legalize nuclear energy in Australia, and so many legends from around the world also working to legalize, coming from countries that don't have nuclear and want it coming. And it was amazing to see Will. This was the first nuclear reactor he had ever seen in his life. He gasped. We went up on the roof and it was sunset and we were looking, and it was more of like a scream. He like screamed when he saw it. And it was incredible to see. And sure, 12 years is a long time to build, but that's a country that's new to nuclear, that had never built a nuclear reactor before. And it built a 5 gigawatt reactor and it powers 25% of the country. And they have a plan to be done with oil by 2050. And I was amazed by the visionary leadership of the United Arab Emirates. And I was disheartened by a lot of the environmentalists who were criticizing the UAE for being a big oil country and blah, 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 hypocrisy. And yet the UAE is decarbonizing faster than any country in the world right now, in the world, because they're combining renewable energy. They have tons of solar, biggest solar farm in the world, which I also saw, and renewables plus nuclear. And no one wants to, that everyone's like, oh, it doesn't, it works fine. And the Emirates is an example, and I'm grateful for them hosting COP28. And I think it was a historic COP. Obviously, there were big announcements about nuclear and an agreement by 25 countries representing 47% of the GDP of the world. To those 25 countries agreed that they would work together to triple the global supply of nuclear energy by 2050. Triple. And while that's very exciting, they were also saying, hey, look, the electricity demand of the world is going to triple too, 3 to 5x by 2050. So really, we're kind of losing. When we triple, we're actually going to lose global market share. And that was sobering. And then, so you're like, oh, we're losing. But then you go talk to the nuclear heads and they're like, triple nuclear energy? Are you serious? Do you know how hard that would be? Like, we don't have the supply chain, we have nothing. And so tripling is this great challenge that we would be amazed to pull off, and we would be losing market share. But what I've got hope on is once you relearn that, the year from like 2050 to 2060, we could build insane amounts of nuclear because we would be fully scaled up. And so even if, maybe the world doesn't increase its usage that much, but energy efficiency continues to take off. I don't know.
Okay. I need your positivity to like flow into me right now because I'm sitting here thinking, with as addicted as the younger generations are to social media and not wanting to work, and we're having to triple nuclear. What do we have? Like a workforce of nuclear around 100,000 people, and it's supposed to be up to like 400,000 people. I'm sorry, nuclear is a
Oh,
very difficult thing. How in the heck are we supposed to engage and inspire the next generations to want to go into something that's going to be a difficult path?
mm.
I need
You
that
just have to
positivity. Come on,
You
Ryan.
got to trust the process. You got to trust the process. This is going to happen because it's physics, right? We're not arguing about some magical thing that kind of works. We're talking about nuclear fission, something that's 2,000 times the efficiency of coal. It works in all the great things about coal, and then all the bad things are gone. And the hardest part about nuclear is that it requires cooperation. And the kids want to plan. Young people, everyone does well with boundaries, expectations, and we're just seeing this. This is all unfolding in front of us, and we are the leaders. It is our responsibility to pass this opportunity on. And if the kids want to take up on it, great. It pays very well. It pays very, very well. And I met a lot of Emiratis, young Emiratis that worked at Baraka. We partied pretty hard and we really got down to it. And I said, how long do you want to work at Baraka? And they were like, oh, the rest of our lives. This is my dream job. I'm literally the coolest person in my whole country. I work at, and to see people's in their 20s and 30s, nuclear engineers, senior reactor operators, men and women, running whole reactors that are powering large percentage points of their whole country. And it was very inspiring. They had great fashion. Oh, the Emiratis are so fashionable and well spoken. And they really set an example. And it's our job to continue to make it cool. And I think a lot of us are doing our best. Nuclear is kind of growing out of this like nerdy, awkward teenage phase right now. And we're learning to be like, hey, we're amazing. Like nuclear energy is the number one source of energy in Europe, and it has been since like the 90s. Like we've been good, and it's proven now. And now the world's starting to want it. It's all of a sudden becoming the coolest energy supply, and we just got to make it cool. And I don't think we should write off young people that they don't want to work. There are some that do, and we just got to compete for their business. And I think we also have to lead as adults and show boundaries with our devices and pass on what we've learned about what it takes to be a great engineer, what it takes to build reliable energy systems, because there is some bullshit going on, and we have a responsibility, just like we have a responsibility to future generations to take care of the planet and these ecosystems and biodiversity. We also have a responsibility to take care of our energy grid, because that's going to give our kids the opportunity to fight for their future and protect these things that we've been protecting all along. So I saw a lot of very good signs, and I was at this. It was like the biggest COP 28 is like the biggest trade show ever, and it has a lot of government officials there, and they make silly agreements. I shouldn't say that. They're not silly. They're just not enforceable. And COP is broken into two sides. It's the blue zone, which is where the delegates and leaders of countries go, and that's where they do all the debates and and you have to have a special pass. And I only had a special pass for one day. Some other people had more days. It was great. I was in the green zone where it's businesses, it's nonprofits, it's tons of stages, it's amazing architecture, and it's open to the public. And I was on that side. I was at the Net Zero Nuclear booth, which is a global group supported by Emirates Nuclear, World Nuclear, it was just your typical giant, beautiful nuclear energy trade show booth. And I was there the whole time, and I talked to as many young people as possible. I just skipped I was so ageist. I was like, I'm here to talk to young people. And they were like, what is this?
Love
Oh,
it.
I've nuclear. Never heard of it. They just never even. I was like, oh, you're gonna like this. Like, check this out. And they're like, wait, is it a bomb? It's like, no. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. And and I'm like, yeah. And every person at the nuclear power plant gets paid six figures, even the janitor. So, do you like making money?
I'm glad I asked that question. I feel a little bit more inspired. Thanks, Ryan, because yeah, I have this interesting outlook on how are we going to get those resources. Okay, let's loop it back really quick to coal. Have you heard about, taking existing coal-fired generation plants and transitioning them to nuclear, like utilizing the existing infrastructure that's already there? Have you studied this? Have you looked into it?
Yeah. And thankfully, not just me, so many people have. And the coal to nuclear transition, fire to fission transition, there's some great publications on it. The first thing I read about it was from the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy has a long multi-stage report about coal to nuclear, and then you go to the footnotes of that report and you see everyone else who's written about it. And so that's kind of, I always try to study Department of Energy documents first and kind of reverse engineer it from there, because I want to hear what our federal government's thinking about it. And so EPRI has done an enormous amount of work on this matter. TerraPraxis, Campaign for a Green Nuclear Deal, Good Energy Collective, Quantified Carbon. These are all think tanks that have been publishing on this. And essentially, there's been a lot of chatter, but I think the only way it works is you try to keep running the coal plant and then try to find a spot nearby and start building the nuclear plant right away. We used to think like, oh, we'll tear down the coal plant and then we'll put the nuclear plant right on top of it. And then we'll use the wires that are existing. And it's like, well, that's hard. It's hard. You can't do two things at once if you're doing it like that. So just put it a couple miles away, build it, and then in one fell swoop, and it will take an amazing amount of coordination. We might pull this off a couple times, or maybe we'll do it 100 times. You turn off the coal and you turn on the nuclear like within a couple of days of each other, and you just disconnect the transmission for the coal and you plug in a similarly sized nuclear plant into the existing infrastructure, and that is the cheapest, most effective way to decarbonize American electricity for sure, and probably all coal-based electricity systems out there.
So, coming from the engineering side, where we're looking at the feasibility studies of those sorts of things, my biggest hope is I kind of see what you're talking about as like the traditional large nuclear, is how to transition the coal fire generation into nuclear. But I'm hopeful that SMR integration into industrial application is going to become a heavy reality. I know that we're still pretty far off with SMRs, but like the whole downsizing, the small modular, being able to truck these modules places, I feel that it's going to be a better transition if we are going to look at reutilizing that existing coal power infrastructure.
Look, I agree with you. And I'm feeling more positive about SMRs in this moment than I have for a while. I originally got into nuclear, like, yeah, SMRs, MMRs, let's do microreactors everywhere. And it's like solar, you know? But, I fell in love with big nuclear because it's so impressive. And and we need to keep our existing nuclear plants open. They're so important. And so much of my work has just been extending Diablo Canyon in California and trying to extend the life of the German reactors, extending Palisades in Michigan, trying to save Indian Point, failing. Those are the most meaningful things we can do as nuclear advocates is like keep our existing reactors running. But the big reactors are challenging to build for many reasons. And so I am feeling good about SMRs. What's cool about SMRs is in so many ways they're very similar to traditional. I like the light water reactor SMRs that are just smaller versions of today's nuclear. I'm less hyped on exotic reactors, I like to call them. Some people call them advanced reactors. We don't, that's a contentious name. People would say they're all very advanced. But, these exotic fuels, these, kind of more theoretical designs. It's like the light water reactor has so much runtime, so much
Works.
we have so much knowledge about it. So excited to see companies like Holtec, Westinghouse licensing with the NRC in the US, and those are just LWRs. And I think the NRC could kind of grease that through. It's a smaller version of what they've seen before. And so, and we as the public get to put pressure on the NRC to do that because this is a civilization saving technology and we can't wait around. So I feel good about SMRs as well. I think they swap in for coal a lot better because a lot of the coal generators are smaller. They're 300 megawatts. And hey, that's what all these SMRs are kind of vying around is around 300 megawatts. So some of the sites have multiple. There are plenty of coal plants in Georgia that are 1.5 gigawatts. And so you could do 5 SMRs and build them in succession or patchwork them around, put it on different sides of the turnpike. Who knows? But I I am feeling more bullish that we can do SMRs, but I will never give up on the big nuclear, and I will always advocate for it. And I think the big nuclear will ultimately subsidize all these other ones because they will be more expensive. And I think it's okay for SMRs to be more expensive, and I think it's okay for American nuclear to be expensive in the short term because we have a leadership responsibility and we can afford it. We can afford to pay a lot for this stuff. Like Americans love paying more for something better. So we should anyways, but and then over time, once we get our confidence back, I think we'll be able to, you know, scale up these designs and drive down the price and transition over the next 50 to 100 years, phase down fossils for electricity and then keep phasing it out for industrial heat as well. And we're going to pull it off. We are. And the world's going to be okay. And it's going to be expensive. And there probably see some pretty gnarly climate change stuff. And got to look that in the eye with courage because we have a responsibility to fix this. This is the world we inherited. And I'm not going to cry about it. And I'm just excited for Americans and people of the world to figure out that like we actually can fix this. We can. It's more of like a public perception issue, a political issue. The engineering is pretty much done. I help with a class at UC Berkeley, which is right over here. I wish you could see the Campanile Tower. It's beautiful. And it's funny because they're all saying we don't need nuclear engineers anymore. It's all discovered. And I don't think that's true because we need them to help build it, but we need more like implementation, enablement people, construction, trades. And that's going to be a big challenge, as you mentioned, as we scale the workforce. But uh, we're going to do it.
Scaling the workforce. Like, how appealing. We're talking about how much money nuclear makes. We're talking about the white glove service that it offers, how it's going to take care of the future. I mean, I am grateful that I have been introduced and pulled into this world of nuclear because I didn't know about it, just like many of these other younger generations. It's something that's new, but it's so alluring. The more and more I learn about it, I'm like very hooked. So, Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Elemental Energy. I know that we started off this conversation with coal and ended with nuclear, but just kind of reflecting the fact that we still have to have coal through this transition phase, which it's sad, but it's proven, it's reliable, and it's something to help us get to the point of that advanced technology implementation. We're still going to need the power to have minds and figure things out. So, Ryan, anything else you want to say to close us off today?
Well, if this conversation interests you and you like the history of energy, I have a few books that I would recommend, and these are the books that have kind of informed my opinion on it. I loved Richard Rhodes's book Energy. It's just the history of energy. I loved this book called The Grid by Gretchen Bakke. I don't agree with the author's take, but I think she had a really poetic retelling of how the grid was built, especially in the United States. And then when it comes to energy modeling and how these energy sources play together, I love the book Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air, written in 2008 by Sir David Mackay, a physicist from Cambridge who has unfortunately passed away. But that Dave David really gets at how these energy sources can work together. And it's not just like we want to think of things monolithically, but these things can and do today work together. And we have to have the nuance to understand that. And then if you want to get into some nuclear stuff, I loved A Bright Future by Dr. Joshua Goldstein and Dr. Stefan Kvist. That book was later adapted by Oliver Stone to the movie Nuclear Now. So if you've heard of that movie, I highly recommend it. I think it was a little long, could have been trimmed down a little bit, but I get distracted easily. But A Bright Future is a great book on nuclear, and it talks a lot about coal. And then finally, shout out to one of my favorite authors in this space, a woman named Meredith Angwin, who worked for EPRI and worked in the power sector her whole career. And she wrote a book called Shorting the Grid. And it's really talking about the challenges on our immediate horizon. to the American energy system and specifically our reliance on natural gas. Because natural gas is great. I mean, it pollutes and like you got to frack for it and everything, but sure, it's cheap. But she identifies something called an energy trilemma, or no, the fatal trifecta, excuse me. And that is an over reliance on too much intermittent weather energy and over reliance on imports from other grids. And she really gets into like how the energy is being traded by all these grids. And then finally, an over reliance on imported natural gas and these pressurized pipelines that, have some vulnerabilities. And then fourth, shutting down nuclear and coal. So all of this is happening, this fatal trifecta, and in the background, we're shutting down coal plants and nuclear plants, and it's accelerating this fatal trifecta. And so I really admire Meredith. I think she's a very brave person because she's looking at it in the eye and being like, look, I'm all about clean air and environmentalism, but we got to be very careful about the decisions we make about our energy future. And and we can talk about it openly and debate it, and we're all figuring it out. No one's, we got to stop this like, I'm right, you're wrong thing. No one's figured it out yet. And it's going to be fun to do it together. So I just wanted to share some of my favorite books in this space that have really informed my deep dive into American energy. And I hope your audience has read some of those.
Yeah. All right. And thank you so much. Everybody listening, as always, stay happy, but most importantly, stay safe. Wow. To sit back and say that coal is still going to be a necessity in order for us to still transition into newer forms of energy until alternative forms of technologies like nuclear and advanced nuclear are in place, it's a hard thing to swallow because there is so much negativity that goes around coal. But hearing Ryan's reasoning around coal and why he supports it still and the positivities of coal, like it is reliable and it is affordable right now. And it does not give us an excuse to stop the progress on trying to advance these other technologies and getting them in place for power generation. But it is very nice to know that those options are still there in order to help us achieve the necessary power generation needed in the future. Another really big takeaway for me was nuclear is cool. And it's coming back with a vengeance. It's out of its quote unquote nerdy teenage phase, as Ryan called it, but helping our young people understand that this is such a desirable profession. Getting into nuclear is going to be amazing because it is the white glove service of energy. Like it is very, very well respected. It's very well renowned. I mean, it's one of those things that does deliver reliable energy. And if we can get it down to be affordable with some of these new generations, all for it. So thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed the episode, please go and give us a rating on Spotify. It does help. It puts us up a little bit further in the search queue whenever you try to say climate or, energy, it puts us up a little bit higher. So thank you so much.